That's crazy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Tonight is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Last week's episode, we talked about what it's like to be a black father. We had a couple gentlemen on the show speaking about that experience. Tonight, I am honored. We have the legend, the Honorable Dwight Bullard on the show.
How's everybody doing?
I don't know if you need an introduction. You want to tell the people who you are, what you do?
Listen, I'm just a humble servant of the people, man. Dwight Bullard. I had the honor and privilege of serving in the state senate and state house for a number of years. But the real passion was the 17 years I spent in the classroom as a teacher. And now I get to kind of use all those tools to try and change the world a little bit. So.
And you were teaching in South Dade, right?
Yes. Yeah. Coral Reef Senior High School.
Yeah.
17 years, with the exception of a couple I spent at G. Holmes Braddock. For those of you class of 2000.
Okay.
Folks out at Braddock. I did a little time at Braddock, and then also at Miami Southridge.
Oh man, so you've been kind of all over the place.
A little bit.
Man, well, like I said, thank you so much for just being on the show. I'm just honored and humbled, man, that you can be on here, man. And we have so much to talk about. There's so much going on, just like in the country. There's always something going on.
There's always something going on.
And I feel like you can talk to everything. Definitely want to talk to you and get your opinion on LeBron and the I Promise School.
Oh yeah.
Definitely want to hear about how you feel about that as a teacher. But if we could kind of start maybe at the beginning. Because I think one thing that we really talk a lot about on the show is representation matters. So I love just having audience members and guests who people can identify with. So it is no myth it is not it's no surprise that there's a lack of just black male teachers in high schools or just any type of K through 12 system. Right. So what kind of got you started being a teacher, and then how did you transition into politics?
Well, so both my parents were teachers is kind of the short answer, right? My dad was 30 plus years as a teacher administrator at Miami-Dade County Public Schools. My mom taught both in Philadelphia and in Miami elementary school. Well, she did pre-K in Philadelphia and early childhood development, then taught first grade when she was here for a time when she was at Miami-Dade County Public Schools before she ran for office. So as much as they didn't want me to be in that, because they were like, teachers don't get paid enough, it's a struggle, they gave me all the reasons. Growing up around it, that's kind of all I saw. So I was kind of conditioned. And when I went to college, majored in history.
You went to FAMU, right?
Went to FAMU. Shout out to the Rattlers, no doubt.
There you go.
Majored in history, and there's really only a couple avenues you can go in when you do the social sciences. You can, go to law school, maybe do the lawyer thing, or maybe get out in the public policy space. But for me, my calling was teaching.
So you were teaching history, and even before the show, we were talking about how you've taught a lot of folks that I know, people that are a lot of my age.
I started early, so fresh out of college, got my first gig, and kind of stuck with it for a long time. So when I look back now and realize that some of my students are almost 40,
that's wild.
And don't get it twisted, I'm just 41 myself. Let's be clear. Don't let the gray hairs and the beard fool you. But yeah, it's kind of wild when you think about it that, you have these 35, 36-year-old students or former students who are now everything under the sun. I got folks that are lawyers, doctors, pharmacists, musicians, rappers, singers,
everything.
So it runs the gambit, man. So it's beautiful to watch.
So what was it like being just a teacher in these spaces where you see just a lot of kids they just don't have, especially male teachers just in general, right? And then on top of that, just a black male teacher. So what was that experience like? Did you feel like you were, man, maybe I can contribute something in addition to just being a teacher?
Ultimately, I mean, listen, the black male teacher shortage is real, right? And just from a numbers standpoint, because I get into numbers periodically, only, in Miami-Dade County, only 4% of the teachers in Miami-Dade County are black males.
Wow.
Right? And that's twice the state average. So in reality, in the state of Florida, only 2.4% of the teachers are black males.
And right? I think nationwide it's like over 80% of teachers are white women.
Yeah,
I think something like
traditionally.
Yeah.
So the numbers are very, very low in terms of black men. Then unfortunately, a lot of black men get pigeonholed into a couple different areas. A lot of them are coaches. In that realm, and a lot of them get moved. If they move into administration, they become like disciplinarians, right? So, so the interaction with black men is always
I see what you did.
Is a difficult thing, right? So I knew that coming in. My dad was an alternative ed guy, so he dealt with brothers and sisters transitioning in and out of prison for most of his career. So I understood that side of it, but I wanted to bring a different perspective.
It's so interesting you're saying this because I've volunteered a lot at MacArthur South.
That's where he taught. That's where he was.
School, right? And that's pretty much you predominantly see black and brown boys. You will very rarely see any white children at these schools. And then all the disciplinarians and just enforcers of policies in the school are for predominantly black men. So yeah, I mean, to your point. So you see all this stuff going on. Is this kind of maybe what inspired, maybe, or also kind of helped guide you into politics? Because that's a big jump, right? Being a teacher to running, or how did that work?
Well, here's what I like to encourage folks. So for anyone who's teaching, especially teachers, it's not that big of a jump. And what I mean by that is we're preconditioned almost as teachers to want to help people, where they are. So when you're interacting with a student, you want to help them read, you want to help them learn, you want to help them get it. Even those that are quote unquote problem children, right? You still want to help them get to a better place, right? Ultimately graduation or matriculation or something like that. So when I transitioned into politics, that's the mindset I took to it, right? It was like, oh, I want to help people, right? Like there are people who are in need of services, in need of help, but on a larger scale. But I also have a skill set in terms of having been around politics. So that was, for me, it was my early involvement. So for anybody who's thinking about it, I'm not saying make the straight jump teaching to politics. Get involved, see how campaigns work, get inspired. For me, it was a mixture of learning from my parents, but also President Obama. I first got elected in 2008, and I felt the energy and the spirit. And I just remember distinctly one speech he was giving about needing help, right? Like needing help from other people, like needing other elected officials to help move his policies. And I was like, that sounds like the move right there. So I decided to give it a go.
Man, that's awesome. And I'm glad people are watching. We have a lot of students from University of North Carolina, Greensboro, a lot of students from the camp that I was just working at tuning in tonight. A lot of folks tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. This gentleman is just a wealth of knowledge. So please feel free to ask, pose your comments. So you're saying it wasn't that big of a jump. I love how you drew the parallels between, because in both situations you're a public servant, right? So what was it like? What was the first thing you kind of jumped into as far as politically? Was it just running straight up, just running for?
Well, for me, I had the benefit of both my parents being elected officials at different points in their lives, and so helping out their campaigns, everything from putting up signs and running around to actually be a campaign manager back in 2004 when during one of my mother's races for office. And then I was like this one shop kind of campaign manager because her budget was small, and she was like, "You're gonna do it." I was voluntold, right? You know what I'm saying? And she was like, "Don't expect no money for it." And I was like, "Wait, I brought you in this world, gonna take you out," kind of thing, right? So
that's funny.
So I just kind of, I kind of went with the flow. It was summer, I was a teacher. Schedule worked out great, so I could travel around. But seeing different parts of Florida, understanding, the minutia of campaign finance, and getting these checks and making copies and going to the bank and making deposits, all the way up to keeping track of how many doors we knocked, how we engaged with the community, speaking at community events. One thing that was very beneficial as a teacher was, and a lot of folks don't know this, but I was deathly afraid of public speaking up through college.
You would never know that.
Yeah. And so I get nervous, I get the shakes, and then took a public speaking class in college that kind of made me less nervous. But the thing about teaching, and all teachers, any teachers watching or future teachers, know this. There's nothing more judgmental than the face of a teenager, right? So, and so when you're up there, when you're up there teaching a class, you learn very quickly that if you're not a particular kind of way, you're going to lose your students. That's the same rules apply when you're speaking to an audience of constituents or people you're trying to get their vote. Is that you have to A, understand your audience, then B, be responsive to what those concerns and needs are, right? And so as a public servant, my job that I felt, and some people disagree with this, was to be an active listener, right? So it's like, I need to know what it is that's impacting you that I can be helpful with. And in doing that, then processing that information and being able to address it in a responsible way. I think too often people running for office think they have all the answers and all the ideas. I know how to bring jobs. I know how to do this. I know how to save public schools. It's like you're overcomplicating it when you think that there's some answer outside of what's right there. You know what I mean? Like in the case of public schools, and the teachers want to be able to teach at the end of the day. So what is it that's prohibiting them from doing that? Is it time? Is it pay? Is it what are the barriers and blockades that keep them from delivering on their job? It's like any other job in America, right? Like and what's funny is there are more blockades than when you think about any other job, right? So at no point do you tell a person flipping burgers, oh, by the way, according to this metric, you're supposed to flip this many burgers per minute per day, or you have to sell X amount of burgers in order to get this bonus. It's like, listen, if it's a slow day at McDonald's, it doesn't fall on me as the burger flipper to make it a faster day. I can only move as fast as that. Same thing with the doctor. No one says, okay, in order for you to get this bonus, doc, you have to do this many surgeries. Or for a lawyer, you have to prosecute or defend this many people. But with teachers, that's what everyone says, and everyone's just like, yeah, I guess that's what you're supposed to do. It's like, wait. My job's like anyone else. I'm only going to be able to move as quickly or as fast as those that I'm trying to serve. And the reality is, it's not the parents I'm trying to serve, it's the kids.
Real quick, I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on what you just said. You were volunteered by your mom to work the campaign. And I think a lot of young people who tune into the show are maybe applying for internships, looking for places to work. And oftentimes we do want experience and also the money that comes with it. But sometimes some of the best experiences could be you working for free.
Absolutely. Especially if you're talking about your passion, right? And some people are having a hard time figuring out, like, how do I monetize what I care most about? You know what I mean? So I can't even use myself as an example on this one. I was watching a biography of Lala Anthony, right? And she was saying how she was a student at Howard University. And got this gig working at an Atlanta radio station as an intern. And she was like, I'm going to Howard for communications, but I have a job waiting for me in Atlanta, right? So, and of course she was running coffee and doing everything else, but she was like, they let her own the show. And so she had to make a decision on staying at Howard or go follow her passion, right? And so, not by all means, I'm an advocate for education. But if an opportunity presents itself, and it makes dovetails into LeBron a little bit, I guess, right? If opportunity presents itself, you got to take advantage of that.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think so. I mean, let's go for it for LeBron, man. So what we're seeing LeBron do, what we saw this week, has been something just like, how do you even begin to describe what he is doing as a teacher, as a politician? This is you. Like, what do you think about what LeBron is, and y'all too?
Right.
What do y'all think about what LeBron is doing? Have you heard of the school?
Right. I mean, it's an amazing feat. So a lot of people kind of get caught up in this public school versus charter school debate, which shouldn't be a debate, because at the end of the day, it should be about the children. In the case of LeBron, though, what was powerful about it was he was like, I want to build a school, but I want to turn it over to Akron Public School. Like, so imagine somebody comes along in Miami-Dade and says, I want to build a school, but I want to create rules and I want to create incentives for it, but I just want it to be a public school. Like, I want these kids to go there. Don't ask any questions. Don't make any special, any barriers or pick and choose or cherry pick. I want these kids from Akron, from the hood, to go to this school, and as a result of them going to this school, I, LeBron James, I'm going to put all these additional incentives. We're talking every kid gets a bike. We're talking, all 3 meals covered.
Yep. Free transportation.
Free transportation within 2 miles.
Food pantry.
The kicker for me is the job placement for parents.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's crazy. And then the scholarship if you graduate.
Full ride to
University of Akron. Yeah. And so, you got to think about the levels of buy-in that have to happen and to use your celebrity to do that. So yes, is he putting some resources in out of his own for what he's been blessed to get? Sure. But if you're Schwinn or you're some bike company and LeBron James comes to you and says, listen, I want you to give free bikes to kids who go to my school, you'd be stupid, right?
Yeah.
Not to be like, yeah, you're right, you're LeBron James, so yes, I'm going to get free bikes. Or, or even the wherewithal to go to the University of Akron and say, listen, can you assure these kids are going to get scholarships if they graduate and meet, your entry quotas, and them to be like, sure, let's go ahead and do it. Like, that's powerful. And that really shows you the magnitude of celebrity if you use it right? Like, people are comparing this to Muhammad Ali, but it was interesting because speaking out was rebellious in the 60s, right? Like, to do something, to be a black athlete with a level of popularity and say that the war was wrong was major in the 1960s. Now, when you have all this money, when you think about what happened with Colin Kaepernick, when you think about all these things that go on, the ability for you to kind of literally put your money where your mouth is, major.
I was watching SportsCenter recently, and they were saying that he kind of is setting a blueprint for what other athletes could and should have been doing. And that's what makes it so amazing. And don't get me wrong, there have been other, they mention other athletes who've been involved in schools and made these major contributions, and they do it, relatively low key. But when you think about the wealth, right? Like, when you think about the amount of money that gets spent on these, I just saw recently someone just signed outside of his deal, he had these folks signing for like $120, $130 million deals, shoe deals, all these different things. And it's like, you have people literally killing each other over Jordans at that moment. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm coming from Mike. Sorry, Greensboro, but but the reality is, Michael Jordan had an opportunity to do like a lot of folks did and say, all right, kids in the South Side of Chicago are killing each other for my shoes. Yep. Why don't I do a shoe giveaway? Like, who's going to stop you from getting 300 pairs of Jordans and distributing them to the schools? Like, it literally would have been no money out your pocket to do it. But we have time after time, story after story about those kind of occurrences happening. Fast forward till now, same thing, but I gotta give credit where credit's due to athletes that kind of take the higher road and do the things. Like, I know Kevin Durant does a lot, in the Oakland community as well as the DC community, and there's a lot of folks out there doing it without the level of notoriety. But be more public, be more deliberate, be more intentional when you've been blessed to get those kind of resources to give back, man. To give back. Man, I couldn't agree more. Real quick, let me read some of these comments. Menex is saying, I had a similar opportunity when I was going through school. The state offered free tuition to me and a bunch of underrepresented minority students as long as we graduated high school with a certain GPA. I think going back to the Lala example, to any public college in the state. Alan is asking, lack of education thoughts. I don't know if I fully understand what that question is.
I mean, it could go a lot of different ways. If we're talking about going back to athletes, for instance, one could argue that there's a system in place. I was actually sharing this comment with some folks around a system in place to kind of crunch these kids from a particular place, move them through a system, and kind of spit them out the other side. Some of the more negative attributes that come with being a professional athlete are the fact that these folks end up going broke on average within 4 years after they leave their respective leagues, or that they're only, on average, an NBA player is only in the league 2 years, right? Like, Like, it's not, when you think about our star players, we never think about the other 12, 13 guys around them who constantly change over, whose names you forget very quickly, who don't necessarily have a lot of longevity in the league. And NFL, same thing. Lifespan of NFL running back is like 1 year, on average. If you get 4, you've exceeded expectations, just because of all the miles that you put on your legs and your knees and your body. So going back to the lack of education piece, you have to recognize, and this is especially for those of you kind of pursuing higher education, that it's intentional, right? That these, unfortunately, these student athletes are commodities to a number of these schools. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill was guilty of that. They said during their basketball program, they would basically run their students through African American studies, and they really were no-show classes for these kind of fake degrees. Texas A&M would run all their football players through this farm, kind of farm culture program, learning, the anatomy of chickens and cows and stuff, and then come out the other side with little no degree. So if you're in those things, don't just write them off as dumb athletes. You got to engage them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Engage them early. You politicize them early. Colin Kaepernick's a fine example. What a lot of folks don't appreciate was, here's a kid who was adopted and could have gone astray, went to the University of Nevada, had good parents around him to keep him on the pathway, but he learned through his fraternity, right? Mm-hmm. How to be more engaged.
You would throw that. Would throw that in there.
No, I'm just saying. As a pathway, shout out to fraternities and social organizations doing their give back as well. But he's at the University of Nevada and could have gone the way, but really got his woke from being around a bunch of brothers, like-minded brothers. Mm-hmm.
So we got a question for you. What are your views on Black Renaissance that's taking place in Hollywood right now, i.e. the development of predominantly Black TV shows, actors, and actresses? And I'm guessing in relation to kind of giving back.
Yeah. I mean, I'm liking what I'm seeing. Shout out to Shonda Rhimes.
Oh yeah.
And what she's been able to do with Netflix. Seeing Kenya Burris, who does Blackish, create some more content with Grownish and some other shows, and you're really starting to see some great things. But what I always caution folks is to be careful, because history shows us kind of these ebbs and flows where people will try to create a flurry of Black content and it gets washed out and overdone. So, you saw it with Blaxploitation in the 70s, right? When all these Black movies come out, Shaft, Superfly, Cleopatra Jones, and all these other movies that have now become iconic and classic, but it was an oversaturation of the market, right? Then Spike Lee brings it back in the 80s, late 80s, but then you see this flurry of kind of, crazy content that comes out of that. While simultaneously on TV, you see The Cosby Show in a Different World and Martin and Living Single in these shows, but then people got burned out because it was like someone was making money off of that. Fast forward early 2000s, you sort of see the same thing. So I say that in the midst of what we saw happen with Black Panther, in terms of real showcasing of the abilities of Black directors and writers and content creators to do amazing work. Like it's not just it was a great Marvel film; it was a great film, right?
Yeah.
And it had deeper meaning and layers and colors and all these other things. So what I would say for the Renaissance is for those people with that level of talent to not sell out to the system, not dumb it down. Don't stuff your creativity, because you want to be able to get a Black Panther and a Sorry I'll Bother You and a Black Klansman and and a lot of different sort of things. You want to like the beauty of the golden age of hip hop was that you could simultaneously have an Eazy-E, an MC Hammer, a Public Enemy, and and any other rapper of the time, all sounding different, all appealing to different audiences, and that's what made what they say is the golden age was like 1988 to 1998 so powerful, right? And then all of a sudden now it's like you see like mumble rap, and you see all these, and you get what you get, folks. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, I know we're on social media, but the reality is that Tekashi 6ix9ine.
Oh yeah.
That's Lil, anybody with Lil in front of the name, just
come on,
anybody
man.
with Young.
Lil Uzi Vert, come on.
Y'all are some challenging human beings. Just from a lyrical content standpoint. I'm not saying that everybody's got to push the envelope. I'm not saying everybody's got to provide, amazing lyrical content, but it's like the beauty of rap is the poetic, is the symbolism, is the extra. And even when those folks that we consider corny back in the day, they brought something new to the game.
But isn't also the beauty of hip hop though also just the beats and the rhythms, right?
No doubt.
Right?
No doubt.
Sometimes you just you're not listening to the lyrics, you're just trying to vibe out and just
understood.
Right, good vibes.
Understood, but answer me this, and we've hung out together, different things. The reality is, I'll use an artist that was big for a moment, right? So you take Jibbs. Okay. Do you even remember Jibbs? Exactly.
I don't know.
So
I don't know if I spoke English back then.
Jibbs was, this is like circa 2007, 2008, and he basically used the beat that the ice cream trucks use. So
okay.
So the pop goes the weasel, right? Ding, 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 and sped it up, right? And I remember distinctly one of my students, who shall remain nameless, but is a Q, so I'm going to hold y'all boys accountable for that. One of my students was like, Jibbs is going to change hip hop.
Oh no!
In 2000, and I was like, interesting you would say that. So fast forward to where we are now, and when you think about the songs that really hit parties going, they stood the test of time. Like,
you're right.
You can drop "Juicy" by Notorious B.I.G. now.
Yeah, you're right.
And there's a 19-year-old that's gonna be like, "Oh my God, this is dope," and there's gonna be a 49-year-old that's gonna be like, "Oh my God, this is dope." But the reality is, there's so many songs that were so flash in the plan. Like you're a student of Soulja Boy at this point, right? Like when he came out, you were doing the dance, right?
I did a little something.
Okay.
I may have done it.
Are you Superman at the club anymore? No, we're not.
What was that one song? Do your chain, hang low.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
these are songs that all of a sudden go the way of the dinosaur, extinct.
So if we can a little bit go back to the Renaissance and LeBron a little bit, bring it back a little bit. I've been having this debate with my friends recently, and y'all feel free to chime in. Where I've been thinking that folks, I think for the most part, everyone has a type of platform in some capacity, whether it's a little brother, a little sister, that could be your platform.
Right.
And I do believe that folks should have a moral obligation to bettering humanity, the world, the communities, whatever. Do you believe, and how do you feel about that? Especially when we talk about celebrities, to me, especially celebrities who get it, who have been disenfranchised in some type of way, or have experience with that. Do you believe that folks have like a moral obligation? That's a big claim that I'm making. But do you believe that people just do?
So I think it was like, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's by Marion Wright Edelman. It talks about services, the rent we pay for the space that we occupy. Right? Like it's like we all have kind of a moral obligation to give back in some way, shape, or form. Now we all know that there are those who cannot, for a number of different reasons.
Absolutely.
Finances, lack of compassion, or just inability, etc. Right?
Yeah.
But for those of us that have some station of privilege, some semblance of something that we can give back, whether it's a skill that we can give back to the world, and that kind of put a pin in that, in the sense that everyone is born, and this is just my fundamental belief, with some ability that can help benefit society. You know what I mean? Like for those who believe in Jesus, you talk about the fact that his father was a carpenter and he was a carpenter, right? So even without all the additional, he had the ability to build, right? Right?
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Same thing. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean,
okay,
but
I'm with you. I like that.
But so many,
I like that.
so many of us kind of negate our ability, whether it is to write, to sing, to dance, to cook, right?
Man,
to
anything,
to lend medicine or give help, or just there's something about you that's beneficial, and we always talk about like you take a corner boy, a dude who sells drugs. It's like your ability to run numbers that quickly means that you should be a math tutor.
Yeah.
That you should be going into a different line of business. Like, how is it that you're able, you understand the fundamental basis of supply and demand, yet you apply it to something that destroys society, right? Like, I get why you get into it, but once you've learned the skill set, you can apply that to anything else. Hot dogs, Gatorade, ice cream, stocks, bonds, whatever. Yep. So it bothers me when people feel as though they lose a sense of hope without realizing they have a skill that they've developed that could be of benefit to somebody else. You know what I mean? So
I'm glad you bring that up, because I want to get a little deeper into this. I really want to ask you about systemic issues. In talking about the corner boy, the dude running the game, as a politician, as a teacher, I'm sure you were constantly bombarded by folks like, hey man, like, what are we doing to address systemic poverty, racism, sexism, all these systemic issues? How do you begin to even address that from a policy standpoint?
Oh, now that's well, first and foremost, you have to have the will to want to change it, right? And since we're going to be transparent and honest, the reality is a lot of people who are elected don't. But people always say, well, if you're saying that, why should I vote? That's the exact reason you should vote. You know what I mean? Like, your engagement puts them on notice, right? Like, if everybody out there was not only registered, that could be registered, but voting, and someone knew that their inability to address a particular issue meant that the next time an election comes around, they're gone, things will get fixed, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people will sit there and be like, well, ain't nothing going to change. The system is racist. The system is corrupt. I ain't going to vote. And that's the exact reason why you have the levels of corruption and problems that you have, is because they're like, oh, I know my small little group's going to vote, and that's all I need to do is impress. And in the case of Donald Trump, that small group that he's trying to impress are rich, affluent CEOs who can afford to go to Mar-a-Lago, right? For other folks in other cities, you're like, well, they're from New York, or that doesn't mean they're necessarily trying to address the homeless issue, right? If they're getting 90% of their money from Wall Street, who do you think they're trying to impress, or who do you think they're trying to influence? So for the folks, especially out there who are of age, make sure you register to vote. If you live in Florida, if you don't live in Florida, it doesn't make a difference. You have to make a difference in that space and show up and be accountable, whether it is city government, school board, supervisor of elections, whatever the case may be. It's getting and drilling down to those essential.
Even next week, there's a candidate forum for Miami-Dade. What is it? I forgot what's on Tuesday night.
School board.
School board. Yeah, school board.
Yeah, if you're around Miami-Dade Wolfson campus, it's free, open to the public. 6:30 meet and greet, 7 o'clock it starts. You get a chance to come out and ask those kind of questions, like
Absolutely.
How do we, but I don't want to get on the voting only soapbox. The reality is that we also have to be solution driven. I think a lot of times people become very lackadaisical about offering up solutions, right? So it'll be like, how do we need to end racism. Well, that sounds great. What does that look like? Like when you're asking somebody, especially, and let me be clear, we have a citizen legislature. These are people who come from all different walks of life. A lot of times older white men predominantly, but coming from different walks of life. So let's say some guy, and this is a guy who was serving with me, was a security guard who became a state rep. Great for security guards to be able to move from that space to that space. But then when you ask him, how do you fund colleges? Or should scholarships be more applicable on a needs base versus a merit base? he doesn't know anything about that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you have to be more deliberate in talking to these folks about, hey, I got an idea. You should run it this way. I had a 12-year-old come to me with a policy idea that blew my mind because it was such an aha moment. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And really what it was this. He was arguing that students didn't understand basic finance, right? You know, how to balance a checkbook, interest rates, things of that nature. Just basic financial stuff that we should all know. And I was wrestling with, do you make it an elective, or what do you do, this, that, and the third. He was like, make it a math requirement. And I was like, he's like, let's be honest, using trigonometry, using, what I'm saying, if I'm going to be an architect, geometry works. If I'm going to, go into engineering, using trig, and that's fine to keep those in place. But what if you're teaching 11th and 12th graders basic financial literacy as a math requirement, since they need a math requirement anyway? So in my mind, if I know I'm not going to be an engineer, and I knew that in 10th grade, right? How much would I have benefited from learning ahead of time how credit cards work?
Yep.
Man. You know what I'm saying? Could have changed the game. Student loans, exactly, right? I wouldn't be in this predicament now. No, I'm just joking.
I wouldn't be in this predicament
You're right.
now.
You know what I mean? So it's those kind of like simple solutions. Remember, that came from a 12-year-old talking to me as a teacher who had been in the classroom for years, and it was right there as he explained to me. I was like, that makes perfect sense. Like, you got to take math anyway. Might as well be the math you like.
Yeah.
Or the math you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with that too, just teaching your parents, especially as like immigrant kids, poor kids, they are oftentimes the educators in that capacity of their family members.
No doubt.
Which that leads me to we talked about education, politics, but now you're doing something different.
Yeah.
What still relates to
all that, but
so what are you doing now?
So for me, it's straight up activism. So I work for an organization called the New Florida Majority. What we do is we do issue-based engagement. What that means is that we take community issues and we politicize those issues. So if you are having a challenge, with local government around, garbage being dumped in your front yard, we're gonna, give you, at least try our darndest to give you the tools to address that. And a lot of people, especially low income, especially marginalized or poor people, are not only fearful of government, but are ignorant to kind of what levels deal with which issues. And so everything from, just basic understanding of how government works all the way up through who you need to call, activism, the meetings you need to show up to get things done. And we don't necessarily win every battle, but it's the old adage around teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish, right? Like, we want to make sure that when it's all said and done, you are self-empowered and know how to address these issues.
So some of the bigger issues I was reading on the website, they all are addressing it: mass incarceration, and being undocumented.
Yeah.
How do you go about preparing folks to address those issues? Because those are huge, serious, very serious issues.
Yeah. Well, first of all, because of the ongoing systemic conditions in the communities that we deal with, the way in which we best address those issues is by letting them understand that there is hope, right? Like, oftentimes these are people who've been brutalized by the system, right? They've seen their, mothers and fathers locked away because of the war on drugs. They've seen their parents or relatives deported, and feel a sense of helplessness. And so, letting them know that there are avenues that, what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong, and that you all have an ability to address those issues, and not only an ability but a right and a responsibility to do so. So at its core, that's kind of what we try to do is give people, some belief that they can ultimately change the system.
We got a young student, a high school student here, asking, as a politician, what are your thoughts on immigrant families being separated from their families and children being physically and mentally and sexually abused.
Well, it's not even as a politician, as a person, none of us should be okay with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's as a human being, it should not be. Whenever there are atrocities that happen in other countries that are similar, we should all be outraged. But when it happens in our own backyard, we should definitely be outraged. Shout out to folks who've been, getting themselves arrested for demonstrations and doing everything they can to make sure to hold the administration accountable. That being said, we saw a judge rule, federal judge ruled that it was irresponsible for us to break up those families, as a country, for us to break up those families, and that we need to do everything in our power to make sure we unite those families back together. That's people power. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't somebody just being like, ooh, they're wrong. There were protests. There was people in the street, putting their blood, sweat, and tears on the line to get that done. So for those who think there's nothing you can do, or nothing ever changes, that's a prime example of something that happened very recently.
And so I want to definitely ask you this question, because we're talking about activism. Mm-hmm. I was hoping also that you could kind of juxtapose, kind of define activism versus organizing. And mm-hmm. And the reason I'm asking it, because we're seeing a lot, especially in this age of social media, where we're seeing a lot of like clicktivism, where it's a lot of sharing posts. And for some folks, to them, that might be enough. Like, they did their part. Right. I'm not saying don't share posts, as long as they're factual,
Exactly. Check your resources.
Check your sources, all that stuff. So what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference, and I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because activism is good, right? If it's heated towards the right cause, activism is great. Organizing is the hard work, right? And I guess the best historical example I would give is that Rosa Parks, when she sat on the bus in 1955, right? To end segregation, that was an activist move. That was a move of defiance. I'm going to because I want to show the world that this is wrong, I'm going to take this stance. That was one day. In order to get the law changed, it took another 387 days, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it took over a year's worth of activism just to get the buses desegregated, and to get the schools integrated. It took even longer to get law schools and to get businesses to recognize that black and brown people deserve the same rights as everyone else. Years and years and years. So we talk about organizing. That's the hard work. And the reality is that we live in a time and place where we can get viral videos out there very quickly and get kind of messages. But what people are kind of lacking, unfortunately, now is the wherewithal to push all the way through, right? I was talking with a sister out in St. Louis, and she was just like disappointed because after Mike Brown's death back in 2014, you saw everybody outraged and, all these people protesting in the streets. And she was just like, it's a handful of folks now again. You know what I'm saying? And she's like, and mind you, the reason she was stressed out was because she had been organizing since 1982.
Oh, wow.
So when Mike Brown happens, she was literally one of the first people they could call, because she had already created an organization. But she also knew that as mad as people were, the only way to change things were to continue to organize. So when people were just like, it's been 6 months, what up? It's been a year, what happened?
Yeah.
She was like, I've been doing this since 82. Like, we've had hundreds of Mike Browns that nobody knew about since I started doing this, and we may have 100 more before we finally get the change that we need, but we got to keep pushing, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's a little disheartening for folks, but the reality is that if you want to see change happen, change takes time. If you see something wrong, and it took 50 years to get wrong, it's going to take at least 50 years to get right.
Mm. What's crazy too with the Rosa Parks example is that she didn't, that wasn't an accident. Mm-hmm. That was a very strategic move to have her sitting there. I think there was actually a lady prior to that they were going to use.
Exactly.
When she got pregnant, I think she was a little darker.
Yeah, well, no, she was unwed mother, and she was a teenager.
That's what it was, right?
She was pregnant, and they thought she wouldn't be the best example for the movement. So it was definitely a lot of that. But let's be clear, Rosa Parks really was inspired, unfortunately, by the death of Emmett Till.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was the thing where she was just like, I got to do something. You know what I'm saying? Like this little kid is dead. 14. For those who don't know who Emmett Till is, Emmett Till was Mike Brown in 1955. Right? He was accused of whistling or catcalling a white woman.
Who's still alive.
Right.
Who's still alive.
Who's still alive. They're saying they're reopening that case. We'll see what happens with that. But at 14 years of age, whistling at a woman in a store, her husband and brother-in-law came and took him from his grandfather's home, beat him to death, and then lynched him. Really threw him in the river. His body was found and mutilated, and his mother chose to show an open casket to let the world see what they had done to her child. And that's, you know, when we think about Philando Castile or Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin or anybody else, it really all begins with Emmett Till. So, you know, to kind of bring it full circle, when we think about activism, here it is, that happened in 1955. Fast forward to, you know, what you see in Clearwater as of last week. So people are still getting killed,
absolutely,
you know, unjustly, you know, by authority figures and by people who have complete disregard for their humanity.
Absolutely.
All these years later, right?
So, man, I feel like sometimes Woke Wednesdays is like selfish, just so I can talk to like really awesome people and ask some questions. So in kind of that, thinking about that, there's this really popular Instagram page called Undocu Media, and recently the guy who kind of runs it, he's the founder of it. He was accused, and people have been talking about how he was saying, you know what, I don't want to deal with black folks. What have they ever done for us? How they've never helped us. So I'm just going to stick to us doing strictly undocumented, like Hispanic folks. So you hear this kind of rhetoric, this language, and I've been talking to friends about how just coalescing, right? This like intersectional activism is so important. And thinking about the separation of families, it's not just at the border. It's through children being killed by the state, right? That's a type of separation of family. Through mass shootings, that's a type of separation of family.
Right.
So to you, how important is it to, when we do, or I don't know, engaging in activism and organizing, to have this intersectional just kind of...
Man, it's critical. It's critical. If we're going to talk about, you know, the browning of America and how, you know, Black, Latino, and other so-called minorities are going to be the majority of people by 2025 or 2045, whatever the projected date is, right? The only way, you know, as excited as some people get at that idea, like, oh, well, you know, that's going to, you know, change the face of Congress, or, you know, there's going to be new presidents and senators that are going to be all these different folks. The only way that changes is if black and brown people come together in terms of how they approach not only politics and electoral politics, but just our understanding of unity and let's name it, right? Like, there is sort of this notion of anti-blackness, right? But I need people to understand, especially, you know, black, non-black, and otherwise, right? That a lot of that is rooted in Jim Crow racism, right? So it's the belief, you know, it's the reality that this country incarcerated or mistreated or abused a group of people for a long time and kept them in the lower rungs of society. And so other groups come along and then make the assertion that because black folks are subject to that condition, I'm also now above you, right? Like, like you were, you know, you're the ancestors of slaves and I'm the son or daughter of immigrants, and that's different. That's a different sort of level in society, and that's, you know, that's bull. You know what I'm saying? We all have to recognize that we all are part of the same systemic problem. I remember talking with an older Cuban gentleman. This is when I was in middle school, and he said that he and his brother had to go to 2 different schools because he was dark-skinned Cuban and his brother was light-skinned Cuban. Like, and it wasn't like he was Afro-Cuban. It was like literally a brown paper bag kind of test. Like, he was your complexion. You had to go to the all-black school. Yeah. Because his brother was a little lighter, he gets to go to the then all-white school. And that's the history of America. Yeah. So when people now feel as though they're at a better station in life because of whatever, their color or, you know, they're this or they're that, that's foolishness. Because the reality is, and you talk about representation matters, the reality is that I think there are only 2 Latinx U.S. senators currently in Congress. Marco Rubio and Bob Menendez. That's it. There's only 3 black people in Congress. There's only like 2 Asian. So you're saying for 100 U.S. senators, and for all the black and brown people and all the representation, all the cultures that we come from, you're talking like 6, 7 people that are now it, right? And so it's like, it's laughable, and it's funny to people like, we've made it, and you're just like, in comparison to what? Like, there's never been a Latinx president, right? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, never been an Asian president. You know what I'm saying? Like, Barack Obama literally represented a fundamental sea change and an interruption in literally 43 consecutive white men. Barack Obama, another white guy. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about a unification, that's easy. That's this is the easy part. Yeah. That we can all, rally around certain people who are speaking to our, to our deeper humanity. I mean, shout out to Andrew Gillum. Oh yeah, who's running for governor here in the state of Florida, and for that reason,
he's from the Heights,
and people are, it's funny, we were just literally having this discussion around, can Latinx folks vote for a black guy running for governor?
See, it's crazy because we're talking about this and how we're supposed to be the majority and whatever in a couple years, but Miami is a scary. If Miami is what it's gonna be like. Right. Then like this is not good, because Miami is a very weird, racial ethnic place. It challenges like these racial binaries that we think of in other parts of the country. It challenges the norms,
exactly, and so it's like hashtag do better Miami. Let's start that. Let's trend that, right? In the sense that when you think about New York and how there's a shared, there's always going to be tensions. But a Dominican, a Puerto Rican, a Cuban, and a black, Jamaican, African American can all go to the same spot, go to the same barbershop, kind of all hang out collectively, and there's really no static. Like, you can grow up literally in that existence. Yeah. Only in Miami is it where you could, interact with folks, of different cultures for all this time, and it's like, well, I'm gonna stay over here. I'm gonna stay over here, and so. It's one of those things where it's like, we always talk about it as a melting pot, but it's like, is it really? It's more like a tossed salad.
Yeah, bro, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I was just exactly going to say that, man.
It's all like a chop bowl from
that's Shout Out Chicken Kitchen. So we got 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left, man. You're brilliant, man. I love just picking your brain, man. If you could tell the people just some parting words, man, just whatever. I don't know, man, whatever.
Listen, word to Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing out without demand. It never has and it never will. Right? If you feel powerless and ultimately desire to be powerful, you're going to have to demand it. And that's whether it's on your job, whether it's in your school, whether it is in your relationship, whatever the case may be. Closed mouths don't get fed. And the reality is that you have to speak up, represent yourself. Be the powerful being that you are, and that will overcome gender dynamics, patriarchy, racism, sexism, or anything else. And so, everyone out there, you are powerful, you are great. So just make the demand.
Man, appreciate you, man. As always, y'all, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Oh man, always a pleasure, Dwight Bullard. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Definitely.